For well over a decade, big tech social media giants have been telling the public and lawmakers and regulators and judges and anyone who will listen that their platforms are, in fact, safe for kids, even as accusations kept piling up that they were knowingly building products that actually cause mental harm. This week, the company's attempts to sidestep accountability hit a major roadblock when a California jury returned a landmark verdict against YouTube and Meta, the parent company of Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. A jury found the companies liable for deliberately designing their platforms to be addictive to young users despite knowing about the possible harm that they were causing. The case was brought by a now 20-year-old woman who accused the companies of creating products with design features as addictive as cigarettes, causing her mental distress. YouTube and Meta were ordered to pay $6 million in damages. Now, you're going to say $6 million in damages for these companies? That's not even vending machine change. I don't even think it's vending. I think they make more money in their vending machines. It's like the money in the sofa. It's a drop in the bucket for companies that bring in billions of dollars in revenue every quarter. But as the New York Times notes, the ruling marks, quote, a major step to rein in social media giants that could open social media companies to more lawsuits over users' well-being, end quote. The verdict is one of thousands of lawsuits filed by school districts and teenagers and state attorneys general against Meta, YouTube, TikTok, and Snapchat, validating a new legal theory that posits social media sites can cause personal harm by design. Again, remember the cigarette thing. The plaintiff's argument draws inspiration from the playbook that was used against the big tobacco companies in the late 1990s, which compelled cigarette makers to completely overhaul their business at huge cost. Both companies say they disagree with the verdict and plan to appeal it, but the losses may be mounting. Just a day before California's ruling, a New Mexico jury found Meta violated state law by failing to safeguard young users of its apps from child predators. The penalty in that one was bigger, $375 million in damages. Prosecutors argued that Meta prioritized user engagement and profit over child safety, despite knowing internally about child sexual exploitation on its platforms. Social media companies have long argued that they are protected by both the First Amendment and a federal law known as Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996. Legal shields that have for years kept them out of reach of most lawsuits. That's because the companies have been able to argue that they are not responsible for content that users post out online. They're basically just a pipeline for information. What goes through the pipe is not their concern. Now, these two cases want to bypass those assertions, signaling that their shield from accountability may be starting to crack. Courts are no longer just looking at what users post of their own volition, but how the platforms are built and whether their architecture actually causes harm, creating a new landscape that these companies might find difficult to argue against. We're going to discuss this after the break with Marianne Franks, president of the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative, and Thom Hartmann, host of the Thom Hartmann Program. Okay, joining me now, Thom Hartmann, host of the syndicated radio talk show, The Thom Hartmann Program, and author of numerous books, including The Last American President, A Broken Man, A Corrupt Party, and A World on the Brink. I'm also here with Marianne Franks, president of the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to combating online abuse and discrimination. She's the author of multiple books, including Fearless Speech, Breaking Free from the First Amendment. Welcome to both of you. Marianne, I would love your help in, I was trying to sort of make that story clear to the viewer, but it's a little, there's got some complexities in it, and fundamentally nobody thinks a few $100 million is going to change the social media industry. But is there a greater significance to these courts, these rulings?
I think there definitely is. As you say, it's not about the fines. It's, of course, by the time you become one of these billion-dollar corporations, the fines are not really the issue. It's the finding of liability. And even beyond that, it's the fact that these trials have gone ahead altogether. The most important thing about these trials and about these verdicts is the information that the public is able to see that they just were not able to see before. The early rulings on these cases that let them go forward were unusual, and it meant that we got to ask questions and we got to see the executives of these companies have to answer questions about what they knew and when they knew it and what they did about it. And that is really what's going to be so influential going forward, because it's not just about these verdicts, it's about the public perception of these companies, and it's about potential regulation by the government that's inevitably also going to change following some of these verdicts.
One hopes, Tom, because I was talking to Max Stoller earlier about the Live Nation story and the Hewlett Packard Juniper story, and it was a story of the absolute collapse of our regulatory state, the fact that the oligarchy now has figured out entire ways to work around these things. So this is the story, the tech story, that gives me a little bit of hope, right, that says that there is some accountability. It may have to be from courts and juries, but there is some accountability. There's documentary evidence that reminds me of the cigarette cases, and there's something that has to follow from this. To Marianne's point, it's not the money. Something will have to follow, whether it's behavioral changes that are mandated by the government or legislation.
Yeah, in my book, The Hidden History of Big Brother, I kind of laid this out, and in a recent article as well, using the metaphor of a house. If your neighbor put a big sign out in front of his house that said, Friday night, big party, everything's allowed. And then Friday night comes and you've got people selling pornography, illegal pornography, and selling guns and shooting up drugs and just all kinds of criminal activity going on. You wouldn't just bust the criminals, or the police wouldn't come and just bust the criminal. They'd also bust the guy who owns the house. Well, in this case, the social media outlets are essentially the house. So there's two issues here. One is this house inviting people in a way that's going to suck them into awful things and encourage, in fact, those awful things, number one. And number two, what is the awful things? What is the content, and how do we deal with that content? And those both need a national conversation, frankly. I think this lawsuit is a good start.
Marianne, Tom's using the expression house, but the companies have sort of used various expressions, including pipes, right? That they're saying they're just a conduit. What people put into it, if a terrorist uses electricity, you can't blame the electricity company. This is also about Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which you've talked a lot about. Is there a break here? Is there something here that says that tech companies are going to have to take greater responsibility about what goes through their pipes or what parties happen at their houses?
I think what's going on here is a clarification. What these companies have tried to say is that everything that happens on their platforms, including, as these corporations become not just social media platforms, but they attempt to become sort of everything apps, right?
Yes.
So they're trying to say always just, us connecting people to other people's content. We can't be held responsible for what those people use or do or, do with that information. But the thing about these trials and the thing about these new cases that are getting traction are saying it's not just about what you've connected people to, it's what you yourselves as the company, as the house, if we want to call it that, what are you doing yourselves? Are you having an unsafe facility, right, where people are falling through the floor or where people are not able to leave when they want to go, if the exits are all blocked, right? So the focus is on saying, well, you can try to say that the content that you provide to people is not your fault, not your responsibility. But these cases are saying, well, what about the things that you yourselves as a company are offering? Things like beauty filters that are causing serious body dysmorphia among young girls. And also, what are the ways that you are trying to trap people or really sort of entice people to keep using things that we know are harmful to them?
And Tom, this is where it goes back to the cigarette stuff, right? There is evidence that was introduced into these cases that demonstrated exactly what Marianne said, that the companies knew that their architecture was contributing to these harms. This is not a conversation on the merits of whether we are just a house or a pipe and its content going through. It's the argument that many insiders have told us for years. This is not a bug; it's a feature.
Yeah, absolutely. Back prior to Section 230, which happened in 1996 with the Telecommunications Act, I ran forums. Nigel Peacock and I, my business partner, ran forums on CompuServe from, I think, 79 right up until 96. And we had about 25, 30 people. We ran over 20 different forums, and, IBM PC, Macintosh, UFOs, ADHD, all kinds of stuff, political. And our employees, because we shared the revenue from CompuServe, they paid us a fair amount of money to do this. just made sure that basically the house was in order and the content was clean and the thing worked well. When Section 230 came, they just stopped paying us. And most of the moderators went away and most of the moderation went away. And we got the modern internet. Frankly, if we were to, and this is hyper simplistic. I mean, we really need to have a conversation about this. But frankly, if we went back to something like that, Mark Zuckerberg might go from being worth hundreds of billions to only tens of billions of dollars. Meta might be slightly less profitable, but I think we'd have a much safer environment, a much more reasonable one. I mean, after all, this is what the network you're on does. This is what newspapers do. You make sure that your content is not destructive.
Right. Yeah, we'd be concerned about our reputation if our content is destructive. Poor Marianne sitting here saying, what does run a forum on CompuServe mean? But I appreciate the discussion from both of you. Thank you. This is important, and you're right. We should be having this discussion. This should be a national discussion that we should all be involved in about what regulation of social media. And I think, Marianne, your point is really valid, that these are not content delivery mechanisms anymore. They're everything apps. So thanks to both of you. Thom Hartmann is the host of the syndicated radio talk show, the Thom Hartmann Program, and Marianne Franks is the president of the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative. We'll be right back.